Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Death and versus Dollars series on toxic stress. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area, our co-presidents, Roma Dawson, wave Roma, and myself, Marianne Shovelin, and our moderator and host, Raina Laurie. We are very excited to have this series and this particular event, and I now turn it over to our host, Raina.
We're excited to have you with us today, and we would like to welcome the Vice President of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, Sylvia Arenas, who is also actually my representative on the board. She is doing outstanding work on championing the rights of families, women, and children, and on promoting racial equity. We are also privileged to have with us today Dr. Rachel Gilgoff. Marianne, the next slide, please. So Dr. Rachel Gilgoff is an expert on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and the impact on our long-term health and well-being. As you can see from the slide, her work in this area has been substantial, which she will share with us today. We will start with Dr. Gilgoff.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to share my screen. And so today I'm going to talk about trauma. So please know, though, that this is a talk about hope and healing, that collectively we have so much wisdom and so many wonderful programs, resources, healing interventions. And really, this is about increasing access to these programs and resources, awareness about the topic and the resources and the healing strategies. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. So jumping in, we intuitively know, we see it every day, that stress and trauma can have a significant impact on a child's health, development, their ability to learn, and it shows up as behaviors. So we see it in schools as absenteeism, repeating a grade. There's studies that children with ACEs and trauma have 32 times increased likelihood of having behavioral and learning issues. We're seeing increasing diagnoses of ADHD, impaired executive functioning skills, impaired relational functioning. And what I want to stress, pun intended, is that this is the tip of the iceberg. Underneath all these behaviors is neurobiology, is physiology, is adaptive, normal responses to abnormal experiences that we're all experiencing and that our kids are experiencing on a daily basis. And so what I want to talk about today is really how trauma, adverse childhood experiences get under our skin. And so I'm going to start just with some definitions to get us all on the same page. And so the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA, they have this really lovely 3 E's definition of trauma. So it's an experience of an event that leaves a lasting effect. So it actually isn't the event itself, it's how we as an individual experience it. And by definition, it leaves a lasting effect. And the example I always like to give is take a car accident with 4 people in the car. The first person is the driver. They may feel guilt, shame. Could I have done something different to prevent the accident? Second person might get trapped in the car and they can't get out. So now they have all these feelings of helplessness, hopelessness. The third person gets out of the car and actually saves their trapped friend. So now they feel stronger, more resilient. And then a fourth person maybe faints and they don't remember the car accident at all. And so same exact event, but each person is going to experience it differently, and that's going to impact how their brain processes the information and what the effects will be. In terms of adverse childhood experiences, so these really are events that are potentially stressful, traumatic experiences that occur in childhood, so before the age of 18. And the term ACEs really came from a landmark study in 1998 between Kaiser Permanente in San Diego and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And what they did is they surveyed over 17,000 people in the Kaiser system and asked them a number of questions, and they compiled those questions into these 10 categories of adversity. So physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, and household challenges, including living with a caregiver who has a mental illness, intimate partner violence in the household, a caregiver where there's separation or divorce, incarceration, or substance misuse. And so the ACE study really galvanized, woke up, in particular, the medical community, because it had two very significant, profound findings. The first is that ACEs are really common. About 2/3 of us adults have one or more adverse childhood experiences, and about 17% of us, and the numbers are pretty similar for California, so about 1 out of every 6 of us have 4 or more ACEs. That's profound. That's a lot of us. The next thing that it found that was pretty dramatic is that ACEs increase the risk for 9 out of 10 leading causes of death in the United States. So increases risk for cardiovascular disease, liver disease, kidney disease, diabetes, suicide, depression, all of these really critical health outcomes for us in the United States. Another way to look at this is population attributable risk. So in North America, 41% of illicit drug use is attributable to ACEs. So for example, if I could take a magic wand and erase ACEs for everybody today, there would be 41% fewer people addicted to illicit drugs. There'd be 40% less depression, 31% less anxiety, 24% less cardiovascular disease, 9% less 8% less diabetes and obesity. And these are really high population attributable risk factors. Another piece of this puzzle is that they're dose dependent. So the more ACEs we have, the more risk we have for mental and physical health conditions. And those were just 10 ACEs that were identified in that CDC Kaiser study. There are additional risks for stressors that can affect our health and the subsequent health disparities that we see. So factors such as discrimination, living in poverty, separation from a parent or caregiver for other reasons like deportation or migration, exposure to climate disasters, even medical trauma, these all can be risk factors for toxic stress, and we're going to talk about that. And while ACEs affect all communities, all of us, some populations are affected disproportionately. So ACEs and their consequences are more prevalent among women, racially marginalized populations, those who identify as LGBTQIA, those involved with the justice system, those with lower educational attainment or lower income, and those who are uninsured or underinsured. For the administrators, policy economists out there, ACEs are really expensive. There is a calculated annual estimated economic burden in the United States of $14.1 trillion. So 183 billion is in direct medical spending, and then the vast majority, 13.9 trillion, is in those lost healthy life years. So how do these experiences, stressors, get under the skin and affect our health? And to get to that root cause is to really think about stress biology and the internal stress response. So we see a bear, right? The stress response is this fantastic biological process that can help us in stressful situations, like coming across a bear in the woods. And this threat is coming in as sensory input. So I see the bear, maybe I smell it, maybe I hear it. It's coming in through my cranial nerves to my lower and midbrain first. So all of this is happening in less than a second, right? In our lower instinctual survival brain before our thinking brain has even registered that there's a bear. So this is these split-second things that are happening in our brain. And one of the first ones is that affiliate response scanning. Are there people around? Are they scared too? Can they protect me? Do I need to protect them? You know, we see this with kids when they fall, right? Before they cry, what do? They look around like, are you scared? Right? And then they start crying. So we scan. Then that amygdala is the threat detector is gonna start a whole cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters like adrenaline and cortisol to activate that fight flight behavior. And it's really three key things that our body's doing in that state. One, again, think quick, that instinctual survival brain. I don't want to waste time planning or organizing my thoughts. I might get bitten by the bear by that time. So think quick. Two, get energy to the muscles. So I'm going to release glucose, sugar into my bloodstream, amino acids. I'm going to breathe faster to get oxygen into my bloodstream. And then I'm going to pump my heart rate faster and harder to get that energy to the muscles so that I can fight or flee if I need to. And I'm going to shut down the non-essential things. So I'm not going to digest my meal at that time. And then the third thing is protect. And we didn't really realize this up until more recently, but our brain is anticipatory. So if I see that bear, even before I get bitten or anything, I'm going to activate my immune system. I'm going to get all those cytokines, those white blood cells ready in case. So all that immune system is activated. If our, again, instinctual brain in that millisecond says, oh, I'm powerless, I'm helpless, I can't do it, I'm stuck, maybe my shoe's stuck in the mud, right? Like I can't escape, we will revert to a freeze system. And that generally involves other systems like the parasympathetic nervous system, releasing endogenous opioids and endogenous cannabinoids, and really conserving energy to the core, playing dead, hoping the threat goes away, that I can just wait it out. These are all really life-saving, critical, helpful, normal responses to threatening situations. The question is, what happens biologically when these pathways are activated over and over again, when that bear comes home every night? What happens when these stressors occur at different developmental ages? When we're in the womb as a fetus, an infant, an adolescent, at different times when different parts of our brain are laying down those foundational neural pathways to set us up for the future. And this is what's been termed toxic stress by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. This prolonged activation of the stress response that can disrupt the development of brain architecture and other organ systems and increase the risk for stress-related disease and cognitive impairment well into the adult years. And now that we know the stress biology, it gives us this opportunity and window to understand what's happening for us, and also an opportunity for where we can intervene, what kind of coping and healing strategies we might need. But if we walk through this, right, if the stressors are happening over and over again, at some point our brains and bodies adapt and become really good at detecting and reacting to threats, even when that bear is no longer around. And so you could see if our brain is constantly in this survival brain mode, it's going to start looking like and feeling like and being anxiety, depression, irritability, impulsivity. If we're not practicing our thinking brain, over time, we're going to have more and more trouble focusing, planning, learning new things. Could start looking like learning issues, ADHD, self-regulation issues. If our hormones are repeatedly telling our body to pump out extra sugar, this can lead to insulin resistance and diabetes. If we constantly have that adrenaline telling our heart to beat faster, our immune system to be activated, right, it can start leading to high blood pressure, heart disease, autoimmune disease, inflammation, sleep problems, chronic pain. And this is sort of a more nerdy, detailed version of what I just said, and that is our experiences fundamentally change our biology. Positive, negative, challenging experiences, they get into us and we adapt to our personal environment, how we experience the world. And again, while that is critical and beautiful and life-saving in that environment, it can be difficult in other environments, right? At school, where I'm supposed to sit still and stay on my little circle, or when I'm supposed to be calm and contained in my Zoom meeting or my next board meeting, whatever it is, right? It can also leave a lot of wear and tear over time on our health and wellness. And these biological changes are passed down from generation to generation in this beautiful way to help prepare the next generation for the harsh and dangerous world that they might be born into. And I always tell this one study because every time I tell it, every time I get chills. So they took male mice and they gave them a shock and paired it with a smell, so that at some point they were conditioned that they had a stress response just to the smell. They artificially inseminated female mice. Those babies never were shocked, never met their dad, and they still had a stress response to that smell. That's impressive epigenetic transmission. They did it a third time. So the grandchildren never met their dad, never met their grandfather, never were shocked, and they still had a stress response to that smell. So this is generation after generation, helping the next generation prepare for threats in their environment, assuming those threats are going to still be there, but they might not be, right? It just depends. And that gets us to just sort of collectively really thinking that some stress is good. We need stress. We need it to practice the positive, the stress response and become resilient, right? So the Center on the Developing Child came up with this way of thinking about it: positive, tolerable, and toxic stress. So positive stress, brief elevations in stress hormones, heart rate, blood pressure to a routine stressor. And this is really, again, building resilience. Every time we practice those healthy coping strategies, every time we're able to co-regulate with supportive people in our environment and stay in our thinking brain, right? Then we're laying down these neural patterns of safety, trust, that we can overcome these challenges, that we have this sense of self-efficacy, and we're getting stronger and more resilient. We're able to take the winning shot then. We're able to get a good grade on the test. We're able to stay in our thinking brain even though there's this challenge. Tolerable stress. All of us are going to get knocked out of our window of tolerance, which I'll talk about. And, a loss of a loved one, a natural disaster, some frightening injury, we're going to get knocked out. We're going to get overwhelmed. And tolerable stress would be, so it's higher levels of stress hormones. They may last for longer. And we have a supportive community. We have people in our corner that can help us co-regulate. We have healthy coping strategies. So we can engage in nature. We can engage in physical activity. We can get our bodies moving. We know about mindfulness. So eventually we can get back to balance and homeostasis. Toxic stress is when we get stuck in that survival mode. Our system ratchets up, and we get stuck there, and it has that toll on our health and our well-being. So the key message that I really want to convey for the rest of my part of the talk, and I've lost track of time a little bit, so I apologize, is that adversity is not destiny. Toxic stress is treatable and reversible. We can, no matter where we are on this path, we can all cope, heal, and thrive at any age, at any time. And that's what I want to talk about now. So using stress biology as a framework really helps me see that we can work on both parts of this stress equation, the stressors, right? We can partner with children, adults, families about what is your environment? How can we help lighten your stress or burden? How can we have resources for when we don't have housing, when we are struggling with food and getting a healthy meal? How can we help with the environment? And if we know that this is getting under our skin, that it's impacting our biology, and we know the stress biology mechanisms, right? Then we can really start looking at, okay, what are your strengths? How have these neural pathways protected you, kept you alive? Let's build on those. And where are ways in which our stress response, these long-term adaptations, might be contributing now to mental and physical health? And we might want to think about what is our toolbox of healthy coping strategies and healing strategies that we can partner on together. And putting both those parts of the equation together, really improving health and well-being, opportunity, and equity. So I love using the window of tolerance when I'm talking with people about this, my patients in particular, but it's really helpful for me too. And it's this idea that this light blue area, this is Dr. Dan Siegel's work, this light blue area, the zone of regulation, that's where we ideally want to be. We hit bumps in the road, we get upset, sad, angry, adrenaline goes a little bit up, cortisol goes a little bit up, and we have coping strategies, we have support, we can stay grounded, flexible, we can self-regulate ourselves and get through it. All of us, though, something's going to happen and we might get thrown into this red zone, that hypervigilant, angry, yelling, kicking, screaming. We might get into that blue zone, right? We can picture kids where this is happening, where we're down, withdrawn. We might even faint. And one way to think about this is that for children or adults who've experienced a lot of childhood adversity, we may have a smaller window of tolerance. We can get primed to see the world as threatening, right? So it takes less of a trigger to get into that hyper aroused, that fight, flight, or that numb freeze zone. And that's protective, right? That's going to help me survive if I can get to those spaces quicker. And right, that might not be adaptive for school, for work. And so we can teach skills. We can use these techniques on the right for ourselves. And when we see people who are stuck in the hyper aroused, how to get them back into their window of tolerance. And the beautiful thing about neuroplasticity is we know every time we're practicing these techniques, we're actually laying down new neural pathways. We're converting that to our habit parts of our brain, and we're essentially expanding that window of tolerance. So that's one way I think of it. And these tools on the right, these are those kind of things where in the moment I'm freaking out. I actually use some of these right before this talk, right? It also helps when I see my kid having a temper tantrum on the floor, when I'm working with a youth who's kicking and screaming. How, even our boss, we can use these techniques, right? So grounding techniques, that's where, and you could even try it right now, like while I'm talking, just feel your feet on the ground. Feel your back against your chair. Really let the earth support you. Feel it protecting and holding you. Really coming back to this safe place. You can engage the senses by naming the five, name 5 things that you see. Name 4 things you hear. What are 3 things you can feel? 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And it's really a way to get people out of whatever the stress moment is and back into this moment, into their body, into a safe place. Breathing techniques. Belly breathing is a personal favorite, but there's lots of them out there. So you can pick your favorite, use it for yourself, but also teach it to others. Sensory support, getting a glass of water, listening to music, offering a hand on their shoulder. Physical activity, maybe we need to change the scenery. Let's take a walk. Let's shake it off. Let's do a loose noodle activity, right? All these different ways to help people get back in their body to feeling safe. Reaching out to the support system is probably the #1 tool that we all have in our toolbox. So helping each other co-regulate and being there for each other. In all interactions, but especially if someone is knocked out of their window of tolerance. I love Dr. Bruce Perry's regulate, relate, reason. Part of it is my nerdy side that likes the neuroscience of it, but it's this awareness that all communication goes to the other person, again, through their sensory input to that lower brain first. And that lower brain is all about safety. So you looking at how I'm talking, you hearing the tone of my voice, the way my hands are moving, you're taking that in and do you feel safe? And if you don't feel safe, it's not going up to the thinking brain, right? So and then after the safety, it's going to go to that limbic. Do you understand me? Do we feel connected? And only then will it go to reason. And we as adults, we almost always jump to reason. But understanding this neurobiology that people could just not even, their thinking brain might not be online. So they're not taking it in, the adults and kids. So that means is regulate first, that brainstem, help people feel safe. For kids, that's really about our calm presence, our tone of voice, getting on their level, being the calm we want them to feel, helping them feel safe, that we're not threatening. Relate, that limbic, helping them feel, I want to understand. I'm going to actively listen. This is what I'm seeing. Am I getting it right? I know you want the cookie. I know you want the keys to the car. I get it. Let's talk about this. And only once they feel calm and understood will they even be in their thinking brain. And so this is really a frame shift. That behavior is communication, that kicking, screaming, zoning out, ignoring, those are stress responses. The youth is saying, I am having trouble meeting an expectation. I feel threatened. I am in survival mode. So it's not manipulation. It's not laziness. It's not lack of motivation. It's brain biology. Kids want to do well. We all want to do well. So if we're not, it's generally because we are lacking the skill. We neurobiologically can't do what we're being asked to do. And oftentimes behavioral approaches backfire in these situations because no amount of stickers or rewards or consequences can change my neurobiology. Like I need support. I need the resources, the healing, I need the modeling, the teaching of those coping strategies. I need someone to help me with this. I highly recommend that. I'll give you some links, but there's Lives in the Balance, Dr. Ross Green's collaborative problem solving, and it's a technique to help juvenile justice system, schools, parents use techniques to really get to that root of what is the skill people are lacking. It decreases recidivism rates and restraints and seclusions in jails. It's decreased suspensions and behavior outbursts in schools. Again, works for parents too. And I'm doing a time check. I think I have about 3 more minutes. Okay. So this is also just a reminder that this is not about, sorry, it's not about all rainbows and unicorns, right? I'm not saying that we just let kids get away with stuff. We let adults get away with it. My favorite words are compassionate accountability. So we're really thinking about empathy, compassion, at the same time that we're thinking of boundaries and structure and accountability, but they might have to happen at different times. Because if the thinking brain is not aligned, you can't be held accountable because you're not even thinking. You don't even know what's happening to be held accountable. This is also a reminder that it's not about being perfect. Dr. Ed Tronick and his colleagues, they recently wrote a book and they looked at good enough parents. Kids were doing well, and they found that on average, there's attunement only 30% of the time. We are only aligned with our kids 30% of the time. 70% of the time, there's mismatch. I know you don't want to put on your shoes, but I have a 9:30 meeting, right? The beautiful thing that they did was they took it the next step and they found that 70% of mismatch, that is the opportunity, the real opportunity for connection and resilience building. Because how do we build resilience? Is through challenge, is through overcoming, having those disagreements, but knowing that on the other side of it, I can still love, support the other person. And connection, we build connection in those messy times, knowing that people still have our back even when it gets messy. So that's the beauty of this work. It's actually about the authentic trustworthiness and doing the repair. We have all these strategies. Toxic stress is preventable and treating healing is possible. These stress busters, supportive relationships, sleep, nutrition, physical activity, mindfulness, getting out in nature, mental health practices, all of these have been shown to improve brain health, mental health, balance our stress hormones, improve immune function, improve metabolic and endocrine function, right? These are the toxic stress antidotes, right? These are the things that can help us heal and be well and counter toxic stress. And I could give a whole talk on these. Raina knows that. So I would love to talk more about these. Please ask questions. We have resources about all of these. The research that I'm doing now is really around, there's actually thousands of resources, interventions. And so can we start building a framework that helps us know what is my specific neurobiology, physiology that's dysregulated, and that would then lead me to which of these thousands of interventions I might want to try first, right? So that individualized, more precise, more targeted interventions, what works for whom and in what order, and we can do it. We're doing it. It's out there. So just to end my little portion on, there are tons of resources. I'm going to put links to these in the chat so you have them, and I can come back to any of these slides because there are these QR codes, but ACEs Aware has a ton of resources. There is a whole training on how to become ACEs Aware and for healthcare clinics and medical and mental health clinics to become ACEs Aware certified. We have whole pages of resources on all of the stress busters. We have a toolkit that's coming out in March, and we have resource pages, so we don't have to do it alone. There's a whole learning center. There's a Surgeon General's report on this. The Office of the California Surgeon General has training specifically for the school setting. It's a free online 2-hour training based on different age groups. There's a whole public awareness campaign for youth and young adults called Live Beyond, which has more additional amazing resources. CYBHI has a lot of great stuff and some behavioral health apps that I'll put in the chat. And so just to say, it's a village. We are all here together in it. We are doing the work. Thank you so much for having me. And I really look forward to the conversation after this and to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilgoff, for providing an excellent education on a topic that impacts all of us. And next, we are excited to have our Vice President of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, Sylvia Arenas, with us. As I mentioned before, Supervisor Arenas is also my representative on the board, and she's doing outstanding work on championing the rights of families, women, and children, and on promoting racial equity. So from Dr. Gilgoff's presentation, we can see that these are groups that are most susceptible to toxic stress and the resulting debilitating impacts. And we welcome Supervisor Arenas to talk about her work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Laurie. And there was an amazing presentation by Dr. Gilgoff. I'm grateful for your work, your leadership in researching this particular area that is not just really important to me, but really important to all of us who care about children and youth and who want to create generational changes for all of our families. And we do that in a couple of ways. Obviously, you're focused on a clinical setting, and I'll be focused more on a policymaking setting, and how those two things, those two fields really cross. But before I begin there, I have to begin with my own story because a lot of the times as human beings, we're propelled into a field because of our own personal experiences. Sometimes it's skill sets or abilities or interest. And for me, it really just began with my own son being born at 29 weeks. He was 3 pounds. He had a lot of difficulty really early on. And I understood because I was actually working. I worked for First Five for 12 years. My bachelor's is in human development in early childhood, and I was spending my time supporting families in early intervention. And so I understood how important it was, and it continues to be, to provide really early interventions for our children. As Dr. Gilgoff talked about, the earlier really that we intervene, the better outcomes we have, the higher the resiliency we build in that particular child, that unit, that family. Of course, it bleeds really into our community. And so one of the things that I did was, like a mother, I kept my eye out like a hawk. And I tried not to assess where my child was, and tapped into those professionals that could provide us with that type of support so that I could actually be a mother, um, and allow for that support to happen within my own family. And so, we went through a lot of the state programs. We had therapy, physical therapy at home. And when he was of course, he was in preschool because I knew that was going to be important for this adverse experience that he had as a baby. And when he stepped into, was it preschool? No, it wasn't preschool. It was kinder. It was kinder. He couldn't retain information for very long. It was very short-term um, memory. He had a difficult time recalling and retaining information, distinguishing between colors, even if you just had mentioned like this is red and this is a red engine, and he loved engines and he loved the firefighters and wanted to be one and dressed as one for Halloween. Yet when I would ask what color is this other item that might be red, he could not place it. And so I knew that we needed to have him assessed. And so I I asked for that, and it was difficult to get some of the services that I knew that I helped a lot of other families advocate for within the school system. And now I was that parent that was not getting those services, and I knew how important it was going to be. And so it made me step into this policy-making role. I was getting my master's in public administration to really step into a different field, and it was foster care. It was the field that I wanted to step into. I had been working also in drug dependency court and understood and saw the impacts of um, generational violence and poverty, and the lack of support within some families. In early intervention, and also the value of early intervention and the beauty in providing that for families, and how magical that is in turning that around and providing some tools for families. And so I stepped into the policymaking role. I didn't intend to be a policymaker, didn't intend to be an elected. But as a mama bear, I understood that I needed to fight for my child's educational rights, and the rights of other children. Just the same, because I knew that if there were parents like me who understood the importance, who were in early intervention field and still were not getting the services that we needed, that of course other families were going to also be at a disadvantage. And so that's how my career began. And really from the very beginning, my point was to make sure that we had as many early intervention strategies within our school district. I made an effort for us to have assessments done at the kinder level, so that we know how we need to support that particular child. And I saw very early on, within my own professional career, that a lot of Latino boys were the ones who were rising to the top in terms of referrals that needed additional supports. And usually it was in a regulation, and in some cognitive supports. And I continue to see this pattern. We know it, because we see it, an overwhelming representation of Latinos in the systems that we don't want them to be in, such as probation and child welfare systems and our jails, and in, of course, not reading by third grade level, as you all know how important that is in our graduation, and absenteeism. And of course, here comes the pandemic, adding another wave of stress to our families, and therefore really creating another level of stress for our children. One that now we're starting to see a lot of, not starting, but we have been seeing a lot of symptoms of that within our school systems. So because of my own experience, I wanted to make sure that I was a policymaker that it could reach as much as I could to our families. And one of the things that Dr. David Williams from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health talks about, and you talked about this as well, Dr. Gilgoff, is that we need to make sure that we build resiliency, as well as recognize how do we move communities from unhealthy to healthy. And it has to, one of the things that he points out, it has to be very comprehensive, but it also has to be place-based. And because a lot of the research shows that even from, say, for example, the 171 large cities in America, not one city in which whites live is equal in conditions as the worst place for African Americans, right? And so we all understand that sometimes the communities that we live in offer us opportunities to learn, to have exposure, and offset some of that, offset some of the ACEs that we are exposed to as children. because there's more opportunities within their school system. And so back to what Dr. David Williams has said is that we have to have comprehensive solutions. We need to begin early. This is something that, of course, Dr. Gilgoff also emphasized on. And we have to make sure that they're place-based, because as we know and recognize now that there's a lot of, we have to have anti-racist strategies that undo redlining, policymaking issues that a lot of communities faced in the past. And there's nothing wrong with communities that look like each other living with one another, but unfortunately for some who are brown and black, that means that those communities offer less opportunities and just less resources. And so that's a difference between, sometimes even anecdotally, I think about one of my colleagues that I served on county council with, and his experience was, his parents moved him from the school district where he was supposed to go to, which was underserved, and went to a school district that was more prominent and offered more resources. And anecdotally, his claim is that that offered him those opportunities to excel and to rise to the occasion, and to also have the supports that he needed. And so the same we know is now true based on research is that where typically our counterparts, our white counterparts are living, are more well-resourced. And so because they're better resourced, they have more access to opportunities that can offset and build and hopefully build resiliency. And that is the one of the last things that he said is people access to a mentor or a positive caregiving or parent or role model in a child's life is another way to offset and build resiliency, offset ACEs and build resiliency. And so we all, in one way or another, know this anecdotally and through our own careers. And so what do we do with the information? We understand, and now at a very detailed level and so comprehensive due to what Dr. Gilgoff presented to us. If we didn't know, now that we could put the whole picture together in terms of how regulation is really at a fundamental level, being able to regulate is then you're able to relate, and I think that after that you're able to have some reasoning. And so that we see this time and time again in our classrooms with children who have what appears to be maybe attention deficit disorder and or stress. And really, as the people who are in the classroom, it is not their field of expertise to distinguish between both. What stress looks like for a child could look like ADHD, could look like attention deficit disorder to others, but it's one and the same, right? It's that inability to regulate. And so for me as a policymaker, I think about when I recognized that we needed to really have a more comprehensive, that I needed to do more than just within our school district realm. I stepped into city council, and within the city council, we have I was in the public safety committee and recognized a pattern of sexual assault within Latina girls under the age of 13. They were the highest number of girls. And some of my counterparts wanted to say, well, no, it's the Me Too movement that is creating that, that is augmenting those numbers. But that incline had been happening for about 10 years. And the number one survivor were children under the age of 16, in particular under the age of 13. And one of the ways that we asked for our system to respond differently was to ask our police department to be trained in in kind of an overall early childhood what can you typically expect for an age range between 6 to 13? We don't need them to be experts, but we need them to understand that when children are very stressed, it may look like they are, bouncing off the walls. It doesn't mean that they're excited and happy. It means that they may be stressed. And when they're making an evaluation of whether to remove that child or let them stay within that family, we need to have them understand what are some of those underlying issues and how can they differentiate between those two, um, uh, so that they can make the right call, right? And that only comes with some level of information so that they can make better decisions. Optimally, we would love to have our social workers each and every time respond at the same time our police officers do, and that is the actual plan for us. But as life is, sometimes that doesn't always happen, right? And so I began to take a look at what can we do as policymakers, um, to address some of that chronic and that toxic stress that that ACEs creates for our children. Um, and it was an effort to really chip at our systems, because at a city level, we're really what we're really focused on is our parks, our streets, housing, and children and families really come later. And so part of my focus was to create a shift in the way that we think as policymakers to, one, be inclusive of children and families, and then to have our systems also shift in how we think about children and families. And so it began with making sure that in the time and count for our housing department, when we count how many unhoused children, how many unhoused people there are, I asked if they took into account children and families, and they said no, they weren't counting those. And so if we're not counting them, how are we serving them? And so then that leaves them out of any solutions or long-term solutions that we were discussing, either permanent or emergency-based housing. Soon enough, they started to count our children and families to the point where we also set aside money earmarked in particular for children and families. We started to also just have more dedicated funding, whether it was after school care during the pandemic, to make sure that children had a safe place to be, because a lot of the time sexual assault is a crime of opportunity, and those crimes of opportunity present themselves when families don't have a lot of options, and sometimes they're living in overcrowded conditions with 2 to 3 families. And when you're living with 2 to 3 families, you have no control who's living next to the next room with you, right? And if you are of low resources, you're not going to maybe not have some of those after school care or quality childcare provider, and then that creates the opportunity for others to have access to your children. And so, actually, one of the ways to mitigate sexual assault, especially for children, is to have quality childcare. And so really what I began to take a look at is that I could impact through policy the way that we see children and families. Well, first recognize them, right? Recognize that they're part of the constituency that we provide. Obviously, all of my colleagues understood that, but we just didn't have any really dedicated way to take a look at how to offset ACEs, how to support some of the most stressful situations, those that are under, eh, like I said, those police officers who are responding to a child welfare call, or who are responding to a sexual assault. Um, to begin to recognize what is it that we are looking at, begin to understand what is just basic childhood development, and and then step into that question about what does stress do to children under those circumstances. And if we understand that, then we can provide the right kind of approach when they're responding to the situations. And so this really this ability to impact systems. I really, when I was in my master's program, I fell in love with the idea of policy making, a public policy, because we're working beyond just one family at a time. We're working at a system that can undo some previous injustices in policy making. And that for me was the most important. And so when it comes to chronic stress, we see chronic stress, the way that it impacts children and impacts families within our systems and the systems that are meant to support or create safety nets for our families, right? And the city of San Jose, where I was a council member, touched some aspects of family, but not comprehensively. And so there I began to do a child and youth master plan so that we can take a look at our children and our families in a different way and provide a system of care that was more comprehensive. And not because the city of San Jose can provide all the services, but because we have partners and to be able to fill some of those areas that we are missing. And so as a policymaker, this is how I respond to ACEs as well as chronic stress, is to make sure that I can create policies that are responsive, acknowledge and recognize children and families as part of our constituency, and two, create policies that potentially may undo some of the systemic racism that was built into some of our policies, or the lack of acknowledgement of how policies serve our children and families. And then, of course, because serving the city of San Jose isn't enough, and I knew that our safety net services really lie within the county, is when I ran for as a county supervisor. And now as a county supervisor, I am in a place where we're doing a child welfare reform. And what that means is we're taking a look at the policies and the way that we serve our children and our families. And I always had that intention. I'm a bit of a disruptor in every system that I step into. And this is no exception. And unfortunately, about a year ago or so, we had a baby die of fentanyl overdose. And it had to do with a lot of different reasons why that happened. One of which is that we returned a baby to a father who was also dealing with his own drug addiction. And I think it's impossible to think that a parent can focus on themselves and their rehabilitation and self-care, as well as provide for a newborn. And really, it was the wrong decision to make. And because of that, that dad is now in jail because of that decision, and the mother died a couple of months later of an overdose. And it was just, the worst kind of scenario that should never happen, that maybe happens a little too often across our nation and within our counties. And so it allowed for me to step into this child welfare system so that we can take a look at what is it that we are doing, what are our the principles that are guiding us in how we provide safety and risk assessments for our children. The state also stepped in and found that over 52% of the cases that they looked at the children shouldn't have been returned to their parents, as well as the safety plans were missing from all of those cases, which tells me, we're in a terrible situation. And so what we have done is a whole plan, a corrective action plan, along with the state, to address some of those systemic issues, as well as a strategic implementation plan, which means it's more of a long-term policy-making plan. Those two tools have allowed us to step in for the child welfare system and course correct, as well as ask some of those questions in terms of what is it that we're doing when we leave children with caregivers or parents that are not providing a, a safe enough or creating risk for the well-being of those children. And when we think about toxic stress, that of course propagates that in a way that it's harder for us to then in an upstream way work to undo, if you will. And so if we can get it right and provide more positive interactions for our children at a very early on stage, we can hopefully provide some of that resiliency, build some of that resiliency, build some of those positive connections and relationships with those children, so that they can, as they are growing, able to focus and able to learn and able to succeed and thrive. But there's so much work to be done in and at the same time, we recognize that Latinos are overrepresented in all of the systems, like I mentioned earlier. And we have a report from our public health department that shows that Latinos are uh, twice as much as their white counterparts to face 4 or more adverse childhood experiences than their non-Latino counterparts, which tells us we need to make sure that we work towards providing some comprehensive solutions, beginning with a really good assessment in our early childhood, making sure that we have the kinds of therapeutic interventions early on and that are free and accessible, that we have, of course, place-based solutions, which I'm really proud to share that we are taking into account and implementing a social worker initiated place-based solution, which is having social workers placed in very specific schools that have a higher CPS, child abuse calls than in other places. And hopefully some of these solutions that are, whether they're strategically longer term or more immediate in terms of course correcting, we are hoping that altogether comprehensively we are addressing some of the pitfalls, if you will, of our own system, as well as what chronic stress and adverse childhood experiences have created for our children and our youth. We don't have all of the solutions, but we are as close as possible to that safety net, to being a comprehensive solution, because we are the ones who are responsible for those safety net services and are providers of those services. And so it's up to us to take a look at our own systems, reflect and change with the wonderful research that, of course, Dr. Gilgoff outlined earlier, and recognize what is happening within our own systems, which is the second part to the Latino health assessment, which is a typical public health assessment. But I also asked for a bit of an inventory, if you will, of a utilization inventory of services of Latinos. What are we overutilizing? What are we underutilizing? So we have a complete story of that. And so really I don't know how much more time I have. I've been talking for a minute. And so if anybody wants to flag me in terms of where I'm at in time, I can take us home.
Uh, but you're sharing really very wonderful stuff. So please continue.
Wonderful. So there's so many things I really want to talk to you about in terms of what the county is doing, what my team has focused on, that are part of those solutions. The other pieces are Child Advocacy Center, which is a best practice nationwide. It's all under one roof approach. And so when a child has an experience of abuse, whether it's sexual or physical of nature, and they need to have an exam, it's really all under one roof. We're really proud of that approach. So that way we don't create any more barriers. We don't create more trauma by asking the same question repetitively to a survivor, and that we begin to provide support services immediately, if they so desire and accept. And so we also understand that our system is imperfect. We have this in San Jose. Of course, our county is much larger than San Jose. It is half of the population, but it's much larger than San Jose. And this one of the main sources of referrals, unfortunately, for sexually based referrals come from the south part of our county, come from Gilroy, our public. And so what we're doing is we're establishing a child advocacy center in Gilroy. We've already found a site. It's just a matter of logistically implementing all of what we need into that site in Morgan Hill. The other piece to that is also making sure that we, in the interim, provide some provisions to address the barriers of the commute. Distances can be great, even for somebody who lives in San Jose, who wants to access the Child Advocacy Center, and who don't want to ride maybe in the squad car with the police officer. And so there's access to taxis and ride sharing uh, uh, companies so that people can actually get there. Um, there's also an opportunity for us to intervene with, not, excuse me, not intervene, but enhance the support systems within our school settings. And we have a School Link Services program that provides a coordinator at site if the school district accepts, and this is free at cost. And so, and a three-tiered approach to interventions for our children and our youth. We are also taking a look at that system. We hope to also augment the kind of partnerships that we have with our schools and with our partners. I'm working on a um, county-wide partnership council, or I don't want to call it a commission because that's Brown acted, and it'll be set to a certain set of rules. But what is really important here is that our partners in our schools begin to really rely on our county-funded agencies and services that we provide. And a lot of people don't know all of what we provide. Um, and if we just had an approach where we are partners and we're not fearing one another in terms of stepping on each other's toes, that we could provide a really comprehensive system of care on site at a lot of our schools, which is what I think the transformation has been since the pandemic. Schools typically very much limited who is on their campus. And since the pandemic, I've seen a real shift. Not everybody is doing that, but for the most part, I think as a parent, I see that in my own school setting. And hopefully what we can offer is also to other parents access to after school care, access to all of our programs and services that we offer and that are available. But we need to become partners and work across systems, because we have one goal in mind, and that is the well-being of our children and our families. And so I hope to also ask you to be part of this, and be part of this partnership and development, so that we can continue to have these conversations. Um, it, for me, really, the most important thing that I had is this call to action for all of you. We heard from Dr. Gilgoff about how important it is, what childhood adverse experiences are, what chronic stress can do to a child's brain, but also the we are correcting some of that previous information where it's like we've heard anecdotally we can't teach an old dog new tricks, and we know from neuroplasticity research that the brain is so flexible, and we can teach even a person my age new tricks. And so there's so much hope and beauty in the research and the work that Dr. Bruce Perry has done, and many others, and of course Dr. Gilgoff and what you're offering us here locally, that I'd love to see how we can create a partnership where people, one, understand what ACEs are and what toxic stress really can do to a child, the brain, and the brain of an adult. We've all gone through a really stressful time of isolation because of the pandemic, and we're still undoing some of those impacts, along with just the hardship of living in a very high cost valley. You've seen probably in your own respective districts exodus of families, and we've seen it even before the pandemic. We had closures of schools, and this relocation of our families, and this new makeup of who is able to stay or who becomes a super commuter. We have to acknowledge those new stressors, and how do we help mitigate and create opportunities for families so that there could be an opportunity to build resilience, to have family time, to be able to have access to the resources that research shows us will help mitigate and help build resiliency for all of us. And that is only done through one, understanding, first of all, the concepts that Dr. Gilgoff said, but second, I think, is creating partnerships that are comprehensive. And built into those partnerships are comprehensive strategies that address all of these issues that ACEs create, as well as toxic stress creates. And so, and being able to address some of those life course exposures. And so I ask you to be part of the solution that we're going to have locally, that I'm hoping to build. We also have a body that is going to be a advisory body, excuse me, to a lot of the work that we're doing around the child welfare system, so that we can hear all of the voices and all of the stakeholders. This is something that former supervisor Cindy Chavez and myself began to do when we were listening to, when we were trying to put together a work plan for their child welfare reform. We listened to a lot of stakeholders, but we certainly did not finish. And so one of the things that I ask you is to please step into this arena with me, so that we can together work on furthering and strengthening our child welfare system, but more importantly, supporting our children and our youth and our families in a way that can address some of the ACEs and the this chronic stress that we seem to be dealing with, not only because of just family circumstances and issues and policy making, but because of the pandemic that has also left a lot of remnants of stress among all of us. So that is really it for me. I'm being signaled over on this side that I need to cut it out.
Okay,
And so
we understand.
I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I was going to make a joke at the beginning about toxic stress and my ability to work in politics for this length of time. But so I'll end with that. I think that I've created community among a lot of the folks that we have the common ambition to make the lives of our children and our youth uh, to just make it better and to create a generational change. And so I look forward to hopefully having you as a partner in that battle. So thank you so much for your consideration, for your time, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for this very heartfelt presentation and your work to change the system. So really appreciate it. So would you have 5-10 minutes at all, or you have to really run? Yeah. So would people like to put questions in the chat if you have any questions? Maybe I could start with my question. Should I do that? Okay. So we believe that 60% of households in Santa Clara County are either comprised of immigrants or they are US-born children of immigrants. So can you speak to the actions that the Board of Supervisors is taking to mitigate the trauma and toxic stress that immigration policies are causing for our families? Families are afraid of sending children to school, and residents are not going to necessary medical appointments because there's so much fear in the community. So, Supervisor Arenas, would you?
Oh, I'm so sorry. It was going in and out.
Oh my gosh.
I apologize.
Okay, so my question was the toxic stress that the immigration policies are causing for our communities. And I believe the Board of Supervisors is doing some work about it.
Yes. Well, primarily, I did write a memo in December asking for us to counter some of what we knew was going to come down the pipe. And so we dedicated $5 million for legal aid to augment those efforts locally. And in that effort, we hope that could alleviate some of the stress, because not knowing is partially some of that stress,
Yes,
right? And
that's right.
you know, we had some hearing opportunities, and I have the last agricultural land in this district, and so we have farm workers in my district that are very much targeted, and so we expect that there's going to be a lot of need for us to provide some additional support, and our county executive recognizes it and understands it, and is willing to really create some investments that way.
Thank you. Any other questions?
There was a question in the chat about which resources are actually available in our environment. I can share my screen for just a second just to show you guys oh, you're seeing my whole screen. That's fine. But this is the ACEs Aware Manage Stress website. We have links to all the different types of stress busters. If I go to Balanced Nutrition, for example, there's handouts, but there's also a link to all these resources that are pretty general, so anybody could use them in any place. But there are some that very specifically give you information for your place. So for example, there are farmers markets that actually take food stamps, and there's a website that tells you in your zip code where is a farmers market that takes those food stamps. So there are various resources, ones that would work for anybody in California, and then others that help you get to some more local resources. So I just wanted to let you know that there is this really great resource for people.
That's great information. And
I apologize. I just want to say, yes, we have and thank you so much, Dr. Gilgoff. We do have Know Your Rights opportunities that we've actually provided to all of the school districts. We're providing free legal support and access to our county council. We have more than 200 lawyers here, and as well as Know Your Rights workshops, and we have a dedicated spot on our website, and I'm going to ask one of my team members to please put that in the chat so that you all have access to it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And it's probably too much to cover, but like the American Public Health Association, Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Pediatrics, they all have like statements and toolkits. So I'll start putting some of those as I can in the chat as well. Somebody asked about various sectors and what work is happening.
So there's also a good question in the chat about what early childhood assessments are being done at like pediatricians' offices, schools, community centers, child protection services. Do we know?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
So there's a question about what early childhood assessments are being done at, for example, pediatrician offices, schools, community centers, child protection services.
Yes, this county is so far ahead with especially with First Five. There's assessments that are happening at most of our public settings, public health clinics, and I'm going to ask my team once again to put that into the chat. And anybody who wants to receive an assessment for their child can receive it free of cost. The county also has a diagnostic clinic for more than just behavioral based issues, and that are behavioral based issues to deal with behavioral based issues. And so if I can ask my team to please put that on the agenda. And I'm getting a little nervous and feeling my own toxic stress because I have I'm sorry, I have a committee for children services and seniors, children, families, and seniors committee coming in 12 minutes. And so I'm so sorry. I will have to log off before I start not making no sense at all. I need to look at all those stress busters that Dr. just alluded to. I appreciate everything. I apologize, but I will have to.
Of course, absolutely.
All of you.
We really appreciate you making the time for us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Arenas. Your talk was fantastic. Any other questions that we have from our audience?
So I guess the question was also that how about outside Santa Clara County? Are those assessments happening? Dr. Gilgoff, would you know?
In general, pediatricians are pretty well versed in a lot of so ADHD assessments. There's a whole Bright Futures sort of toolkit of what, developmental screening tools, when to do them at what age. So hopefully they're, if you go to a pediatrician, they should be well trained. They know the academy, guidelines, and so they can do those. I think the question though, is connecting people to their pediatrician, all the resources and accesses for people who are scared to go to their pediatrician for the reasons that we were talking about. So getting that information out there, and then there are additional resources like regional centers that offer services. Ms. Arenas also talked about First Fives. So there's a lot of resources, but I think the issue really is about accessibility, awareness, and helping people understand their rights so they know they can access them.
Thank you. Makes sense. So we have Jorge Arellano from, I guess, a charter school, and he's talking about the fact that they've had their Know Your Rights training. So that's wonderful. That's really helpful for families who are really under toxic stress because of that.
Well, I will say, one of the things that causes a lot of fear and anxiety and stress is that when you feel powerless, right? Like this anxiety comes from not knowing what's coming. And so Know Your Rights did an amazing job at empowering our families to know, to plan. It's like, these are the things that you can do, right? So you do have power, you do have rights, and then also plan what are actions are you going to take in the case of a tragedy like that occurring. And you could just tell they were really empowered. And I mean, they're asking, we did it for all the schools, but now they're asking, they want to bring it again for individual schools. So they want more parents to hear it. And so we had about 50 parents. So it was an awesome training. So yeah, we were very grateful for that.
Thank you. That's great. So, Dr. Gilgoff, do you agree that that helps a lot to be prepared to deal with stress?
100%. I mean, there's actual studies that talk about how unpredictability is the most stressful state for our physiology. Like, and and we as humans, we will actually predict. We will choose a known trauma over unpredictability. Like that's how scared we are of the unknown and unpredictability. We see this time and time again. So yeah, 100% knowing what's out there, knowing your rights, getting this information is huge for calming the stress response.
Speaking of unpredictability, we have another question. Are any of these services likely to be affected by potential cuts from the federal government with its new administrative regulations and edicts?
That, I mean, you guys probably know this as well as I do, but yes, that's what seems to be happening and what the fear is, and there's pushback and there's people kind of standing up and fighting for different services, but employees are getting cut, and then when there's no employees to run the programs are going to fall apart or get cut. We are, for example, we have a project with the CDC, and they've been told they can't communicate with us for a while, so that project is on pause. So again, hopefully things will sort themselves out on some level, but yeah, I mean, it's going to affect programs. We already can't access some materials on different websites that we were using for our research. So yeah, it's unfortunately already happening where it's making it harder to do the work that we're doing.
Is the office of the California governor very involved with ACE's work? Are they willing to take up the slack that the federal government is?
Yeah. Well, I can't speak for what they're going to do, but yes, in terms of being involved in the ACEs work, they are really involved, and we work ACEs Aware, the Office of the California Surgeon General, CYBHI, which is the California Behavioral Health Youth Initiative, the Safe Spaces. Like we're all working together, which is really great to coordinate services.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I guess, are there any other more questions?
It sounds like people have addressed, our speakers have addressed a lot of the questions that came up in the chat, and really appreciate all the information is incredible. I think if there are not any more questions, I would like to just say thank you to our audience as well as our speakers, and the recording will be made available on our website, the LWV Bay Area, in a couple days. And I will also try and post the chat information, which has a wealth of information, various websites. Rena, do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I really want to thank you, Dr. Gilgoff, for all that information. It's very valuable for us to have that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for all the work that you guys are doing and for having me here and for this conversation. I learn every time too. So this was fantastic. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
my final word would be that it's important for all of us to stand up and raise our voices to say what needs to be said in our country.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate all the work that all of the people who are participating in this event right now, as well as what Jorge and Dr. Gilgov and Ms. Arenas is doing. We need to work together because we are all in it together.
100%.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
Have a
very
great
much,
rest
everyone.
of your day.
You too.
Yeah,
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for attending.
Mm.